Hi, Zizaran here with another build guide for the upcoming Scourge League, and this is a build collab with Jungroan, and he loves Spellslinger builds, and that is what this is. It's a VDDD Inquisitor Spellslinger. This is something I ran in the past on Necro, and it still looks pretty decent. This league is Necro, and something Darky was considering running, especially as the second build. However, the Necro version is a little bit more investing, and it might not necessarily be the best starter. This build that we're showing here today is going to be probably a little bit better for softcore, but should work fairly well on hardcore as well. It's not like going to have a super multi-layered defense, but it's going to be really decent damage and a very large HP pool, basically hitting close to 10k HP with a really nice regen. And slingers are very simple to play. You're basically just going around right-clicking, and it's really fun and looks great. So here you can see we have like a step-by-step tree showing you where to take the points when. And here in the endgame tree, we have, for example, a Glorious Vanity of Doriani. This gives us Corrupted Soul, really good for Templars because you really want to have like a big focus on hybrid. So you can see, for example, here we have 5.7k life and 3.5k energy shield. So a really nice hybrid, and we're getting a large amount of regen. So we have 1k life regen, 1k ES regen. And that is why the Corrupted Soul is so good, because it splits the damage you're taking between both. So you're effectively getting double the regen. So here in the skills, we have like your leveling process and how to start leveling the build. You're starting early on by doing Stormblast Mine and Orbistorms. The way that works is you put Orbistorms up and then you do Stormblast Mine inside of it, and it'll proc the Orbistorms, making it go more times. Once you hit level 28, you can already switch to a Fire Slinger. So you can use Firestorm and Armageddon Brand. And you might have to play around a little with restoration and stuff. Maybe you can't fit it instantly level 1, but Spellslinger does like get more mana restoration the higher you level it up. And then for additional single target damage, you can use Wave of Conviction with Arcanist Brand and Elemental Weakness. Now once you get Act 9 and around there, you can switch to Detonate Dead and Volatile Dead. And I'd recommend make sure you have these gems leveled by the time you get here. You never really want to be in a scenario where you're switching to level 1 gems. And you see like everything should be very clear and easy to follow here with what gems to use. There's also lots of notes, so make sure you check out the notes section for loads of information that Jungroan has put in for making it easier to follow the build. If we go to the item sets, there are early, mid-game, and late-game items as well. And especially early, this is super simple with basically just life and resist on pretty much everything. There's no like crazy uniques or anything you need to make this work. Everything is just very easy, which makes it okay for solo self-fun as well. A very important thing about gearing to mention is that spell damage isn't that big for this build. We're particularly focusing on the corpse explosion part. The spell damage isn't terrible, it's not an awful stat, but if you have the choice between fire damage and elemental damage or spell damage, the other two are a lot better. And you can also use Grand Spectrums later on in this build. Also depends a little bit about price. Sometimes they're really cheap, sometimes they're really expensive. So, you know, just play that a little bit by ear depending on how many people are using them. But for example, doing 2 Grand Spectrums that are Cobalt will give you a bunch of crit, and then this will give you a bunch of elemental damage. So a very important thing for builds that use corpse explosion damage is that it relies a lot on specters you're carrying with you, and that's why we actually use a level 20 specter gem. The reason you wanted to be level 20 as early as possible is just so that they don't die regularly. Now once you've actually encountered a boss, you've gone into, let's say, Shaper or Maven, if your specters die once you're inside, that's fine. But you do want to like resurrect them once you're back in your hideout. But once they've been in an arena, so let's say you're going to Maven, those specters are in that arena and are part of the Desecrate pool. And the reason we bring specters with us to fights like this is we're doing what's called diluting the specter pool. So if I go into, for example, Shaper or Maven, there will be a bunch of monsters that have maybe a low percentage XP. Once we go into something like Shaper or Maven, there will be a bunch of low HP monsters part of that fight. Like maybe monsters with 50% increased life, 100% increased life, etc. But we're going to be bringing in specters that have 800% increased life. So there's several listed here as well. And you can change to like higher ones later on. Now, because of this, and you always want to have these with you, we recommend making a Spectre Bank. So you want to level a Witch to level 28. And then you can get the +1 maximum Spectre node and have a Desecrate and a Raise Spectre. And you're basically parking 2 Spectres on that character. The reason for that is if you're playing your main character, you have your Spectres die, maybe you don't notice for a few maps. And if you don't have a way to resurrect them and having to go back to the original area where you found them can be a little bit annoying. So it's much better to just have it on a Spectre bank, then you don't have to like keep going back for them, because they will die fairly reasonably after the Spectres lost so much HP in either the last patch or the one before. Another thing that can be really good on this build to get some extra defense is to have a shield in your weapon swap with minimum endurance charges on it. Whenever you swap to that, you will gain the 2 endurance charges and they'll get a timer and slowly expire. But that means you could regularly swap to that to get the endurance charges. So with Volatile Dead Spellslinger, Barrage support is really good on Frenzy. The reason for that is that it basically, whenever you're desecrating and then doing Volatile Dead and Detonate Dead, it doesn't always use or cast all the spells at the same time in a great fashion. And you'll notice a very big difference with using Barrage support on this, and you'll be able to get a lot more of your damage output out. And if you've never played Spellslinger before, what it basically does is it reserves a spell, basically as an aura. And then whenever you attack with any wand attack, so that could be default attack or frenzy or anything like that, it will cast those spells. So it's a very cool way to play builds. So because we're an Inquisitor and we want to have a large amount of regen and we're effectively doubling the regen we get, you can get a lot of regen items like Marble Amulet is really good. Having a Stone Golem is really efficient as well. Later on, you can have that in the trigger of your weapon craft like this. So whenever you are like re-summoning your Golem, it'll always be up. That is definitely one of the strengths of Inquisitor. So let's cover some of the Q&A things at the end of the build. Are there too many gems to equip? Well, in this build, we actually have like 2 spots open. It should be very easy socket pressure, so you're not going to feel like super swamped on gems to put in. As far as mana issues goes, Spellslinger is getting a very big buff with the mana restoration, making it way easier this league. And at the end game, we have the non-channeling skills of minus mana cost. You can also use a replica Conqueror's efficiency, and you're basically able to have virtually 0 mana cost. So mana issues shouldn't be a big thing on this build. And until you do have the crafts, you can use the enduring mana flask, and that should more than enough solve your problems. And as far as quality of life and defense, things like that on this build, you don't have like a crazy amount of layers, but you have such a large amount of raw HP, and we get such a crazy amount of regen. That, and we can get even more regen in the next patch because they're coming out with like just more life regen on gear, which is really good. The more life regen you get, the better, because this build basically doubles it. So another thing that's important to mention as well is that you don't need to build, for example, penetration or like elemental weakness curses and stuff like that in the end game, because we're using inevitable judgment. So anything that you do to a monster's resist, be it negative or positive, doesn't matter. And that's why we don't use Wave of Conviction in the end game. So completely ignore anything with like lowering resistances or penetration. As far as financial hurdles for this build goes and what's going to be really expensive, obviously like just min-maxing your rare gear is going to be pretty expensive, but as you can see, we're not using a lot of like mandatory uniques. Getting a Bottled Faith is really good damage for pretty much any build, so farming Cortex for that, really good. Glorious Vanity is really important for the build as well, and that'll definitely be fairly costly, especially at the start. But having that Doriani thing is so good because it splits the incoming damage and really makes Inquisitor stand out. Other than that, it's a very solid build and should be a pretty great league starter. Make sure you go check out Jungroan on Twitch. If you have any questions, he'll be able to answer anything about the build. He plays so much Spellslingers and is really good at it. Really good guide, and thank you so much to Jungroan for taking time out and making this guide for us. I hope you guys are all going to have a great start of Scourge League. Thank you guys so much for watching. Sub if you liked the video. More importantly, try to die less than I do.